Hi, I'm Don Pizzette, Chief Product Officer of ACI Learning, and I'm here to give you a demonstration of our Practice Labs lab environment. And we're going to do a deep dive today into all the various bells and whistles that you'll find inside of our platform. There's quite a lot to look at. All right, let's go ahead and get started, and I'll show you each piece along the way. First off, when a student logs into our environment, they're greeted with our user interface, and it's designed to be simple and easy for a student to get into the right spot and start to work with the system. Now, the primary use case that we have here is someone going through a step-by-step guided lab to perform an exercise. They've learned something in class, now they want to get hands-on experience doing it. However, there's no rule that says you have to do that. A student could throw away the instructions and just do whatever they wanted to, use it as a sandbox, experiment around. It's all full versions of the software. In many labs, there's hardware that's attached. Students have access to it. And whatever changes they make when they exit out, well, they get reset. So it's a nice, clean environment the next time they log in, and they can repeat the lab if needed. But let's go from the step-by-step perspective, since that is the most common. On the left side, we have our step-by-step guidance. First off, it just gives them an introduction to the lab, lets them know how to use the interface, what learning outcomes we've got, if there's an exam tied to it, what exam objectives are matched, and other general information about just how the lab is going to work. Some of our labs have an assessment attached, which will have inline questions or screenshot-based exercises they have to submit to get graded for their performance in the lab. Other ones are just an exercise they perform on their own, so it's kind of a self-graded type environment. If I advance onto the next page of this, I'll start to see my actual lab steps. And the idea is that they can have the lab steps on the left side of the screen while performing the exercise over here on the right side where the actual virtual machine is sitting in this case, I'm on a Windows server, so they can go through and perform the various exercises and so on. Now, different people prefer this to be represented different ways. They may want it to be larger or smaller. The default layout here is kind of a compromise. But if they click the three little ellipses buttons up here, the dots, they'll get an option to switch between a small, medium, and large layout for the step-by-step. And so that can give a little more readability and a little more screen space over to those steps. So now from here, I can scroll down, start to see it. Everything is nice and clear. Now, personally, I do like this view where it's nice and easy to read. And there is a collapse button right beside the ellipses that you can hit to hide that. So now I can do work on the lab, I can pull the steps back up, look at where I'm at, collapse it again, and continue to work. So very easy flow there if a student chooses to go that route. All right, I'm gonna put it back to the smaller level, which is the default, and I'll go ahead and click Next to move to the next page. And on the next page is where this step-by-step exercise actually begins. So here we get exercise 1. It's telling me what we need to achieve. So here we're gonna explore some different Windows operating systems. It gives me the topology that I'm using. So we'll have 3 different virtual machines and their IP addresses. And then here's the steps. Go to this machine, execute this command, click on this button, whatever it is to achieve the goal of the lab. And the learner can verify that what they're seeing on the screen matches what they're seeing over here in the step-by-step exercise. So it kind of holds their hand as they walk through it. If they get a different output, then something went wrong. And they know they need to go through and correct that and get back to where they need to be. Now, as they progress through this, each section here is kind of a different exercise. Now I'm on exercise 2, I can click next, exercise 3, and so on. And as I go through them, I can mark them complete when I finish. And so as a learner, that'll help me to track what I've already done and what I haven't. If I leave, this lab environment is going to get reset. All the changes will get undone. So I need to know what I've already completed. And so that is tracked between sessions, and it'll show that they've finished those exercises. Now, as they do the exercise, it may tell them to switch between different machines. So for example, when I first logged in, it put me on a Windows Server, I believe this is a Windows Server 2019 machine. But anyhow, it drops me onto a Windows Server. It is Windows Server 2019. So I'm on that machine, I can experiment around and do what I want, but I can also flip over to a Windows 11 machine. And so here it's getting connected. And there's my Windows 11 desktop that I can come in and interact with the same way as that server. I also have an Ubuntu Linux machine is on the next tab here that we can flip over and get to see that environment. And visually, it's very different. So this is a great way for students to learn the different UIs available in operating systems. But we can even do other devices, like here is an Android tablet. When I switch over to that, I'll see an Android tablet, which is normally a very touch-driven device, but here we've got it enabled where the mouse will simulate touching on a touchscreen so that they can go through and see what it's like to navigate on a Android machine and interact with the apps and launch the Play Store and all the various things that they need to do on a mobile device like that. Now, in other labs, there may be real hardware that's tied to this. So for example, maybe it's a Cisco lab, and so there's routers, switches, and firewalls. In those cases, I'll see a black terminal. They just drop right to a command prompt. There's no fancy graphical user interface for those. But on most operating systems, there is a GUI, and so that's what we see here as we go through the lab. All right, the step-by-step is pretty easy to understand. The interface to the virtual machines, pretty easy as well. But there are a lot of other options that are tucked away kind of out of view here that I just want to highlight for you. First off, when I look at a virtual machine, you'll notice that I've got this blue menu that's kind of floating here on top of that desktop. And if I click that, you'll see where I can pop up an on-screen keyboard. This is really handy for somebody who's launched the lab on a touchscreen device. There's clipboard information. You can actually copy and paste text between the virtual environment and your actual desktop and vice versa. Really handy in courses that involve programming because you can write your scripts on your own computer and then paste them into the virtual machine to test them and run them. We can view additional information about the virtual machine. We can send Control-Alt-Delete and perform a right click. The right click also handy if you're on a Mac or if you are on a touchscreen device. So different ways to be able to facilitate that. You can also reconnect to the device. If you have a weak internet connection, it's possible that your connection to our data centers might drop, and in which case you can just click the reconnect and it'll reestablish and you'll be right back in your lab right where you left off. It doesn't reset unless you time out after a long period of time. There's a little I, the letter I up here that you can click that gives you information about the lab. This will show you the username and password, and I'll tell you, it's super important to have that. I am constantly forgetting the password, so it's nice to be able to access that right there. The username and password will be in the lab steps as well, but it's nice to have quick access to it right there. And then lastly, we have an ellipses button here where you can toggle a few other options like automatically logging in. This system auto-logged me in for the lab, which is nice, but if I want a real authentic experience, I might turn that off so I get used to the actions of logging in every time. We can switch to console mode. The default mode that's displayed here is designed to give you a really fast screen refresh so that the users aren't seeing a delay. We don't want them to right-click and then have to sit and wait for a menu to come up, 30 seconds or whatever. We want them to right-click and see the menu. Well, our default client is built for that. But there are certain times, like if you're going to boot into a recovery mode, where you might actually need to see the console of the device, and so they can switch to the true console and see that. And if they know they're not going to use a device in the lab, they can choose to hide it. That way there's not too many tabs up top. It can get a little overwhelming if you're in a large lab with a lot of machines. In addition to that, we can control the virtual machines themselves. Not every virtual machine is booted for every single lab. There's times where we don't need one. So for example, I've got a Windows 10 machine here that's not booted up. Well, I could click the arrow beside it and choose to power that on. And if the device was already on, I could click that arrow and you'll see where I can power it off. But I've also got two other options, reset and suspend. Reset is really nice. Let's say you make a mistake and it's bad. You've blue screened the machine. You can't interact with it anymore. It's locked up. You can choose to reset it. That will reset the machine, basically power cycle it to bring it back on and get you back online. Now, let's say you've done something truly bad, like deleted operating system files and you've damaged it, so a reboot isn't enough. Well, right above that, you've got refresh. And what refresh does is it says, reset it back to the way it looked when I first booted up, right? Put the lab back to its initial status. And when I say the lab, here it would just be this particular machine. This one machine would get rolled back to the way that it was at the beginning. I can also control these all together. Up at the top, you'll see a power button here. And if I click on that, I can power on all devices, power off all devices. And I also have refresh and reset for all the devices. So we can do it all at once, just completely reset the lab and get everything put back in order. Another thing we can do here is inside of our gear menu, we can change the way a lot of these things look. We've got our automatic login turned on, but there's also the device view. Right now, I'm in the single device view. So I just see one device right here alongside my step-by-step lab. And I'm gonna minimize the step-by-step part for a moment. Right now I'm just seeing one single machine. If I scroll down, I simply see the bottom of that machine and that's it. But if I click that gear and flip to multiple device view, now I'm seeing the machine that I'm on, but if I scroll down, there's the Ubuntu machine. There's the Android tablet. I'm seeing each of the machines in my lab all in one screen. This is really useful when you have a lab that requires you to go back and forth between machines, or you're executing a command on one and you want to see the output on the other. It's a very, very handy thing to have. And I also have the option to do pop-ups. And this is where each lab machine pops out into its own window. If you have multiple monitors or just a really high resolution monitor, this is super cool because you can pop it out, set it to a higher resolution, and lay them out on your screen so you can work on more than one machine at once. It's one of my favorite things to do. I can't do it right here on camera, but in real life, when you have multiple monitors, definitely check that out. It's a cool feature to have. All right, I'm gonna flip back over to single view and bring my lab steps back up. All right, so that's kind of the rundown of how we interact with the virtual machines themselves. There are a few more things that you'll see up here in the top right, like we can go into full screen view. I'm in full screen right now, so mine will just exit out of full screen. There's a folder icon, and this allows you to exchange files between a virtual machine and your own environment. I mentioned earlier, if you had a script, it's nice that you could write it on your own computer and then copy and paste it. Well, what if you had multiple scripts? Well, you could use our file functionality to transfer those files and get them into the lab environment. You can also view reports, which would show your progress. If you've taken a graded lab and you want to see what your performance was, you could jump in and view that. There's our help functionality. If you're running into issues, you can contact tech support, and then it's your account information and your ability to exit the lab. So all of those are different things that are built into the lab environment. We also have some troubleshooting tools that are built in here if you're having a poor experience. If you keep getting disconnected, for example, well, you can reach out to our tech support and they'll often ask for some information that can be seen right here under this last ellipses menu. First off, it'll show which of our data centers you're attached to. We have a data center in the United States and another one over in the United Kingdom. You need to know which one you're in order to get the best experience. And we can pull up a device log that'll help troubleshoot any connectivity issues. There's also a network performance tester. If you think that your network is just not able to keep up, you can test it out. It'll run through a test and show you what the performance on your system is. All right, so that's kind of the rundown of the features and what the students experience when they're in the lab, but I want to highlight a few other things that are really worth pointing out. First off, this is all in our platform. So if you log into the ACI on-demand environment, you'll see all of our labs and you can access them. But we fully support integrating into other platforms too. So if you have your own LMS or you're working with a partner that has their LMS and they don't want to use ours, that's fine. We can do an LTI integration and they can launch our labs directly from their own environment. So we have integrations like that are available. Talk to your account representative. They'll help you to understand what you need. We can also do white labeling. So right now at the top left, you see ACI IT Pro. That's the brand attached to this. And I've got a yellow and blue kind of color scheme. We can change all that. It can be white labeled for your partner or for you as a reseller to be able to match what your partner needs. And then lastly, we can do custom labs. The lab I'm showing you here is built for CompTIA A+, so it's a certification-based exam, and that's great for a lot of people. But many enterprises or companies that are starting their own certification and training programs, they may want custom labs that meet a whole different set of requirements. We can build that. Just talk to us, let us know what your requirements are, and we can walk through the process of what it would take to get that built out and deployed in the platform. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into the Practice Labs environment. Hopefully you've got a good vision of what the labs are capable of doing and how they provide the learners with a hands-on learning experience that gets them prepared to jump out and support the technologies that they're going to work with in the real world. Well, I appreciate you spending the time with me, and thanks for watching.